So by now, if you haven't seen the movie Thunderbolts, you've at least seen one of two things relating to it. Either number one, it's very much A24 inspired movie trailer full of flashing lights, directed by the guy from Minari, stunt choreographer from this, or you've seen the reviews for it or the initial reaction that say, oh, it's the best movie since Endgame, or Marvel has done it again. You know what they say for every single MCU movie that comes out? But now that people have seen the movie and discussions are happening around it, I want to talk today about, are either of those reflections of the movie true? So while my personal answer is no, I do think that the movie Thunderbolts allows us to have a more interesting conversation around the current state of the MCU and moving forward. It's a conversation that we really haven't been able to have around the MCU in a while. Is this different? Is this a new start for the MCU? Is MCU kind of changing directions towards a different tone, a different feel? Maybe is it growing up with its audience now? Even going into the trailers and into the movie, you can see that within the realm of the MCU, something was unique about Thunderbolts. The color grading was different and taken a bit more seriously, and we just don't have that flat color scheme you see across all MCU movies these days. There appear to be real sets and real stunts and real explosions. Nothing immediately jumping out is something that was filmed on the volume, for example. Bucky punching a chicken in the face. That's weird. And now that I personally watched the movie, I agree with a lot of the online sentiment that says that this is much more intimate than your average MCU film, where the best scene in the film isn't this huge action scene set in space or, the Empire State Building's imploding or whatever, but rather the best scene in the movie is a father and a daughter talking about their shared trauma, where you have the Yelena and Red Guardian who both lost either a sister or a daughter in some sense, and that's the standout scene in your film, not because the film's bad, but because that was done very, very well. Name the last MCU movie where some talk about trauma or shame was the standout. I can't personally name any. The final set piece of Thunderbolts is not one of these grand action sequences, but the final action set piece isn't really an action set piece at all. It's more of this Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind sequence, where Yelena has to go through mental recreations of her past over and over again. It's a much more personal one, and I really gotta give props to Marvel and the creators behind this movie for having the guts to do something like that, something so different to what they usually do. Something so different to, Red Hulk trying to destroy Washington, D.C. Now, don't get me wrong, this is still an MCU movie, which I think is going to hold a lot of this conversation back. You still have a lot of jokes, it plays it mostly safe in terms of its story and characters, and that overall comfort and familiarity that you have with watching every single MCU film, it's still there. It's not like they went ahead and made Citizen Kane and called it a day, and now that's what every MCU movie is going to be from now on. So why is Thunderbolts inviting this different conversation? Why are we kind of looking at this through a different lens? Is it because of those trailers? Or is it because there's something more to chew on here? I believe what sets Thunderbolts apart is that the things that make it different, the talks about trauma, talks about shame, depression, bipolar disorder, it's not just hinted at towards the background or seems to be like a soft theme in the movie. No, they're much more front and center here. They are actively discussed about in the movie, which is not new to Hollywood, but it's certainly new to the MCU. A lot of the Marvel movies leading up to this were still kind of geared towards a lot of different audiences, but let's be honest, they're still meant for that younger crowd, right? Thunderbolts felt like it was actively trying to be a bit more of a mature film. Like, you remember that scene where that little girl got control all deleted by the Void? My entire theater gasped. I gasped. I'm like, shit, that's kind of fucked up. Or in that mental sequence towards the end, Yelena goes into a room where she witnesses herself passed out by the bathtub from drinking too much, and then that Yelena wakes up, pins the other Yelena against the wall in a fight, and forces her to drink vodka. That's a bit more mature than what you get in an average MCU film. Now, not all of this is done perfectly. I would say as a whole, on average, the themes discussed within Thunderbolts are still surface level. Even though they're surface level, they're not in the background anymore. They're brought front and center and advertised as the main driver for this movie. I think it's one of the reasons that Multiverse of Madness, controversial opinion, is my favorite MCU movie post Endgame. Because while it still has the MCU bones, you can tell while watching it that some third party is involved. It may still have the jokes, it may still have the tone, but you can tell that there's some other force behind the camera. In Doctor Strange 2's approach, it was obvious it was the king, Sam Raimi. There was some third party that you could tell was meddling with things. And I really, really liked that because it brought this unique flair. It made it stand out in my mind more than, freaking Brave New World did. That same approach applies here. While watching Thunderbolts, you can tell through the structure of each image, through the intimacy of its action, through how reined in its final moments are to allow for a more personal story to come through. There is some third party, whether it be director Drake Schreier or some of the writers or even the performances, for example. Something else is affecting that MCU skeleton we see so much of. I think that gives Thunderbolts its unique identity, which is good. And we should get more of that in the MCU. This is the type of conversation that I was hoping to have directly after the Endgame. We got a little bit of it with WandaVision, but then spiraled quickly into just whether or not TV was correct for Marvel, and we kind of got distracted from the whole unique identity of MCU properties. But I am glad we're having that conversation now. I do think Thunderbolts has that unique identity of these more mature themes, a little bit more artful direction, but I don't think it's perfect. There's still some room for improvement. So for example, a lot of these themes that are more front and center, the background necessary to fully digest and appreciate what the movie's trying to do is completely done off screen. For example, you don't really get any scenes describing or showing to you Bob's background or his trauma from childhood. He just kind of walks up to Yelena at the first 30 minutes of the movie and says, "Oh, by the way, I have depression." That's not really effective. Or same thing with Yelena. Rather than open the movie as a call forward to the scene we see in the end where she's passed out by the bathtub, struggling with her drinking problem and her loneliness, she just kind of tells you in the middle of this action montage after she jumps off of a building, which is still kind of played off for laughs while she just begrudgingly punches these guys and saves a hamster. Ghost is here for the same reason as someone who's just a loser and struggles with her own problems, but is brought into this larger family of the Thunderbolts as a whole. However, the movie just winds up letting her feel like another action figure, right? She doesn't really have much to add to the conversation rather than a few quippy lines and albeit really cool action scenes. And Taskmaster. So yes, there is room for improvement. I don't think this is the A24 Marvel movie that they were advertising it to be, but kind of like Doctor Strange 2 and kind of like with Eternals, I do think that its uniqueness is to its benefit. This will give the movie legs as the MCU moves on. As Fantastic Four comes out and Doomsday comes out and we get to these grander and grander stories, I think Thunderbolts is going to hold up really, really well as this more tightly controlled, straightforward, more artfully done, intimate one that still has those MCU bones, but down the line, when the MCU finally does have to eventually pivot to its more A24 film, whatever that may be, whatever you want to call it, something just so shockingly unique, so shockingly original, that really drives people back to the theaters because they have to lay their eyes on what the MCU is trying to do. I think when that movie eventually does come out, I do believe that Thunderbolts is going to be part of that conversation. Say that while Thunderbolts wasn't that movie, it wasn't what it was advertised to be, I do think it's planting the seeds for what will one day be Marvel's more original, unique, personal, grounded, unlike anything else they've ever done story. What did you think of Thunderbolts? I know this wasn't really a full review, but there's a lot of reviews out there, and I wanted to chat about its most interesting part. So what did you think of Thunderbolts? Where do you think the MCU goes from here? What do you think a good sequel to Thunderbolts could be, whether it be a direct sequel to it or a more themed sequel? Like, what other Marvel movie do you think could pick up the reins that this is trying to make in terms of a unique setting, a unique direction, so on and so forth? Let me know down in the comments below, and for more movie chats like this over a cup of coffee, like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.